I'm of the mindset that everyone should know a little about cars. I've always been mechanically inclined, and I think that may have saved me. I was using dating apps a few years ago. I met this guy. He seemed super nice. We talked for a few weeks before I was willing to meet up with him. His dad owned a local gun store where I would go get my target stuff. I used to be in a women's league for competition shooting, so I had seen this guy around and had a decent impression of him, but I wanted to be safe. He invited me to a concert at a local town site. It was a concert I really wanted to go to, and I figured that it would be safe since it was at a well-known place with a lot of security. I let him pick me up because he had talked about mechanics and cars, and he wanted to show me his Mustang. He bragged about how well he kept it running and how he babied it. I was into time trial racing at the time, so I was interested to see what he had done. He picks me up and we start heading to the event. Right before the exit, he says his car is acting funny. I was watching the dash, and if you've been racing, you know our cars and trucks usually have extra accessories. Whether it's aftermarket racks and gauges or switches, there's usually something aftermarket inside of the car. There was nothing extra. The car felt like it was shifting correctly. There was no shudder or noise, nothing to indicate any problems. I was like, that's weird. And all I said was we should try and limp it to the concert venue. It's less than a mile away, and it's better than being stuck on the I-15. He agrees and drives us very carefully the last mile. We get to the concert and things were okay-ish. He kept watching me and buying me drinks. I refused to drink, so every time he gave me one, I would make up an excuse and go to the bathroom and flush it. He kept making comments about how well I was handling my alcohol. I was super uncomfortable. The concert ends and it's time to leave. For context, this concert happened at the local reservation town site, and at the time, the res did not have great cell service, so I couldn't get a hold of anyone to come get me. I decided to bite the bullet, and I talk him into taking the old highway instead of the 15. It sounds silly, but when you take the old highway, even though it's slower, people are more willing to stop and help you than they are on the freeway. I figured if he was having car troubles, it would be safer, and we wouldn't have people flying by us at 80 miles per hour. We made it halfway between the town site and our town, and he says that the car is acting funny again and pulls over. I'm stone cold sober and didn't notice anything wrong, so I get out of the car to check it with him. He starts making comments about how I'm drunk and I should wait in the car, and that it's safer because you can't trust drunk Indians, especially with a little girl like you. This dude had no idea that I'm actually native and I just had an albinism. The hair on the back of my neck are standing up, so I checked my phone. I just barely have service and I started texting my dad. As I'm walking away from the engine compartment, I noticed that he was watching me, so I started acting like I was trying to get cell service to get help. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched this man take the spark plug wires off the distributor cap and switch the order. Your spark plug wires connect to the distributor cap based on the order your cylinders fire in, so doing that will either make the car run terrible or not even turn on. I managed to send my dad a picture of what he's doing, and my dad tells me to start walking. As I go to walk away, this guy gets back in the car and opens his glove box, which exposes a pistol he had. He tells me not to worry and we will be safe. I probably broke a world record for how fast I was texting my dad. He says to start walking and tell the guy that he is on his way and that our friends live up the road. So I do. I start walking with a purpose and take off as quick as I can. The guy is yelling after me, and I yell back, "The wind is too loud and I can't hear you. I'll be back with our friends." I'm scared out of my mind. We are 10 miles out of town with no one around. The closest road actually led to a cemetery, so there's really no one here to help me. I get a really bad feeling the farther I get from the car, so I turn around and look. The hood is closed, his lights are on, so I decide to hide in the farm irrigation next to the road. I keep walking towards town and text my dad what's happening. I hear a car slowly come up from behind me and I see a flashlight, so I press against the side of the ditch and wait for it to pass. Once I can't hear it anymore, I crawl out and just kind of keep walking along the weeds. My dad texts me that he sees me, so when he pulls up, I run to the truck. As we make it towards town, we pass the dude, and he's got like 3 cop cars around him. My dad tells me not to worry about what happened. I heard through the grapevine later on that he had been charged with violent crimes in the past, and that he had been arrested that night for concealed carrying without a permit. The police never talked to me, but I haven't seen that guy in town since. If I didn't have experience with cars and I didn't know what he was doing, I could have been dead in that ditch instead of hiding. Most communities have where you can take basic car care and maintenance courses. I highly recommend everyone takes them and at least knows the basics. This dude knew that I knew cars, but his whole goal was to get me so piss-ass drunk that I wouldn't realize what was happening. So let's not meet again, fake car troubles guy. This happened years ago, but the thought of it still keeps me up at night. I was walking through the hills of a provincial park with my dog during the winter, so the sun set much faster than I expected, and before I could get back to my car. Once the sun was gone and all you could see was darkness, I was walking slowly through a field, when out of nowhere, I had, to this day, the most gut-wrenching, undeniable feeling I was being watched. I turned around, and in the distance, I saw a figure standing there, darker than the night sky around us. The instant I saw him, my stomach dropped, and my body literally froze. I knew in that moment, somehow, he was coming for me. I grabbed my dog's leash, and we book it. I mean sprinting, full speed up and down hills, around trees, down embankments. I was running so fast as if my life was dependent on it, and to this day, I'm sure it was. So I make the 30 to 45 minute trip in 10, and all that stands before me in my car is this switchback you have to go back and forth up if you want to reach the top. So once again, I'm giving it all I got, running up this switchback as fast as I possibly can. And once I reach the top and look back down, who else but this person chasing me? And does he go up the switchback like how any sane person would? Of course not. He starts sprinting right up the middle of this goddamn switchback, headed straight for me. I scream at him, "Fuck off!" And he doesn't say anything, not a single word, just continues running right at me. I'm so lucky my car was at the top of that hill, because as I ran towards it, just like in the horror movies, I dropped my keys and am fiddling with them, trying to open the door. Just in time, I get the door open, I throw my dog in, and I shut the door behind me just as this guy reaches us. Best part is, there was no other vehicles parked anywhere around us. But where did this person park? Yeah, right next to me, of all places. Now, this guy literally jumps into his truck so fast, and to this day, I have never seen a better example of speeds out of there like a bat out of hell. He guns the engine so hard, black smoke is blasting out of the back as he swerves out of there, leaving skid marks behind him. I sat in the back of my vehicle for hours afterwards, shaking and crying, knowing I was this close to whatever he had planned for me. And that's why I'm sharing this story, in hopes that people won't ignore that gut feeling, the little voice in the back of your head that tells you to run. If I did that day, I never would have noticed him in time and would not have had the head start I needed to escape. Always trust your gut feelings and intuition. It might really be the deciding factor in if this is your final day on Earth or not. When I was 6 or 7, I had an awesome best friend who lived in the apartment complex right across from me. She and I used to go roving around on adventures, helping the older folks in the complex get around, etc. It was the 90s and a small town, so our hard-working single moms didn't worry too much if we were off the bus before they got off work. They told us to always stick together, don't talk to strangers, stay close to our section of the complex, and to never go to the playground at the top of the hill by ourselves. Naturally, being 6 to 7 and 8 to 9, we were pretty obedient until one day when they were way later than usual. We were bored out of our tiny noggins and thought it would be a brilliant idea to hike the massive hill and go play on the playground. So up we went, and all was well, at least for a few minutes. My spidey senses started tingling, and when I turned around, there was a man standing there. He didn't look creepy or anything, just a normal younger dude wearing a burgundy sweater and khakis. I looked around to see if he had brought his kids up or something, but I didn't see any. I grabbed the swing I had been pushing my friend on and made it stop, whispering to her that there was a man behind us. She looked behind us and stood up quickly.
"It's okay. You two can keep playing,"
he said in a very soft, quiet voice. My friend spoke up. "Nah, we're just leaving anyway." She grabbed my hand and we began to walk away.
"If you want, I have a jungle gym across from my apartment. We can go play there,"
he said, moving closer to us. We backed away, still hand in hand, both of our red flag sensors going wild.
"I like watching you two play. You're very pretty."
He continued moving in longer strides. We booked it, taking off down the hill at breakneck kid speed. We looked behind us to see him chasing us, and we both started screaming. A little more than halfway down the hill, we saw both of our moms standing by their cars talking and smoking when they heard us. They immediately started sprinting to us. Apparently the man realized who they were, and he started taking off across the vast parking lot back to his apartment. Our mom scolded us something fierce and explained to us that what happened was the exact reason that we were to never go that far from our neighbors ever again. This happened several years ago. I was home alone one evening when I heard a knock at the back door. This confused me, as no one ever used that door. My husband and I lived in a fourplex at the time, and all of the units had a back door at the top of a narrow staircase. These doors were a little inconvenient to access, as you have to go around the building and up the narrow stairs, as opposed to the wider main entrance at the front. It didn't make sense to use the back entrance, and I couldn't think of anyone who would go to that door to visit. As I approached the back door, I saw two tall men in the window, standing at the door. A chill went down my spine. I did not feel safe opening the door, so I called out, "Hello?" One of the men tapped on the window.
"Yes, hello. May we come in? We are with Bresnan."
At the time, my husband and I had Bresnan for cable, but did not have any issues with it. I replied, "We're not having any issues with Bresnan. Is there a problem?"
Ma'am,
The man said.
can we come in? We're servicing the area and it's important we look at your cable.
I shook my head. "We're not having any issues," I repeated, "so there's no need to stop by."
Ma'am, we are visiting every resident. Let us in so we can do our job.
I noticed the man grab the doorknob and try to open the locked door. I slowly grabbed a knife from our knife's block and held it at my chest. "We're not having any issues," I repeated, trying not to convey shakiness of my voice. "So you don't need to be here." The two figures appeared to shuffle and then straighten.
Let us in. We're on a deadline and need to do our job.
I glanced at the clock, gauging when my husband would arrive home from work. I gripped the knife tighter.
Ma'am,
I saw him try the doorknob again. I closed my eyes and felt overwhelming gratitude of always locking my doors. Just then, a thought came to the forefront of my mind. "I'm sorry, I can't help you. Could I please get your names and badge numbers? I can give your supervisor a call to let them know that our cable is fine." I heard another shuffle, and one of the men replied,
No need to, ma'am. We're sorry we wasted your time.
With that, both of the men exited the staircase and disappeared into the night. Shaken up, I held the knife tight and tried to get my bearings. I remember making a mental note to call the cable company or the police, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold my phone. With the knife still grasped to my chest and the phone falling out of my other hand, I sank to the floor and cried. When my husband returned home, I told him what had happened. I was still very shaken up and had started crying again after he came home. He immediately called the Bresnan Cable Company and spoke to a representative who informed us that no one from their company was out on assignment in our area. The next day, we asked our neighbors if they had had a visit from the company. No one had. So, to the creepy men who tried to break into my home under the disguise of cable repair, let's not meet. Hi. Me, my sister, and my mom have been trying to make sense of this for the past couple of hours, and the facts get less comforting the more we compare our experiences of that night. So last Friday night, I, a 17-year-old male, was home alone while my family, besides my sister, 21, who was at work, stayed in their cabin a few kilometers away. I'm used to staying home alone, as this exact scenario is very common in the summertime, especially while I'm working and can't travel from the cabin and back. I'm not usually jumpy or afraid while home alone anymore, used to the odd creaks and settling noises of our old house. I was especially comforted by the fact that my sister's dog was also in the house with me that night, and most noises could be attributed to him. And if anything were to happen, he would act as a guard dog of sorts and alert me to anything odd. At the same time, however, he is the type of dog to bark at any noise or person walking past the door or windows, so I'm used to hearing him bark or growl at night. Even so, this past Friday, the sound of his barks at nearly 12 a.m. were disconcerting, to say the least. Despite my comfort with staying home alone, I'm still terrified of the premise of a break-in or some other uninvited human interaction at midnight. I let him bark for a few seconds, telling myself it was just someone walking past our glass door in the adjacent alleyway, and he would quiet down once they passed. Needless to say, that's not what happened. He kept barking and growling for a few moments too long, and I finally got out of bed. I slept in the basement and walked upstairs to check it out. As I'd suspected, he was standing alert at the glass door. I was comforted for a moment until I walked over, ready to close the curtains and go back to sleep, and saw the door open about 2 or 3 inches. I froze. I had let Bosco, the dog, out earlier that night, but I know I closed the door. I've never left this door open. I am a paranoid person with bad anxiety, especially concerning break-ins and the like, so I would never, home alone, forget to close the door. I'm 100% certain. But at the time, I didn't let myself think about these facts or even acknowledge that I could not have left the door open, because I knew it would send me into a spiral, possibly even an anxiety or panic attack if I didn't explain this away. I closed and locked the door, double checking that it was certainly locked. Using the flashlight on my phone, the lights were all off. I looked around the entire second floor of my 3-floor house, including closets and other reasonable hiding spots, just to put my mind at ease, and upon finding nothing, went back downstairs to my room. As I was down there, trying to push away the fear, I could hear Bosco walking around on the floor that doubles as my bedroom's roof. I thought I was overthinking it when it started to sound like human footsteps accompanied by Bosco's footsteps. He walks around for about 10 minutes before I put my earphones in and talk myself down until I can fall asleep. At 2 a.m. the same night, my sister comes home from work. I woke up a few minutes before this to Bosco in the basement, which he never does. There's even a gate to stop him from getting into the basement, whining at my bedroom door. When I got up to let him out, my sister walked in, and we let him out the front door rather than the glass patio door, letting him in the same way. We talked for a while before I went back downstairs and my sister went to the bathroom. I forgot about the door, busy with work for the next few days, and I forgot to mention it to anyone until tonight. My sister and my mom were at home with me for a movie night while my dad and brothers stay at the cabin. I remembered the door situation when we were picking out horror movies to watch. I was sharing it as a creepy, almost funny story before my sister spoke up, saying that, the same night, an hour or so after they got home, the door was open again. The same door that was locked from the inside, and not opened since, earlier that night. My stomach dropped, and I started shaking the second that this was revealed. We first started trying to explain it away. Maybe she had let Bosco out and forgot to close it, until we both recalled that we'd used the front door. Then we were trying to justify a reason someone would break in, not to steal anything, and proceed to stay for 2 hours before leaving. Ultimately, I realized that I quite possibly locked someone in the house with me, then forced them to hide upstairs while I searched the second level of our house. Then, this hypothetical person would be trapped up there now, knowing that this house, that appears empty with the rest of my family gone and all the lights off, was not empty, and there was a dog who would bark if they showed themselves again, alerting me to their presence. Then, when I was in the basement and my sister was in the bathroom, they ran out the glass door, which is timed perfectly to when they found the door open once more, much wider than when I found it, as though they were only in a hurry on the way out. Perhaps they left it open the first time for a quick escape, or to stop the loud sound of it meeting the door frame. Either way, it ties together too perfectly for me to reasonably brush it off. I know it's unlikely, especially with nothing missing, but in this small town, there have been many reports of break-ins with nothing missing, vandalizing, or just breaking and enterings many times, so it's not as unlikely as it may be in a bigger city. I can't make sense of this, and I'm shaken up thinking of the possibility of someone being in my house while I was asleep, alone in the basement. There's a part of me that doesn't believe it, but I can't shake the too many coincidences that all tie together to make this as concerning as it is. Just a heads up, this will be a long one, and the whole story might be a bit hectic because it still terrifies me till this day to even think about. But after binge reading multiple similar stories here, I decided to share as well. So the whole thing happened back in summer 2016. For some context, my parents go on holidays quite often, and I used to stay home alone for 2 weeks at the time to look after our dogs and take care of the garden in general. I've always been a bit of a scaredy cat due to my experiences with being harassed and followed home a couple of times. My neighborhood was relatively new at the time, so the whole thing was surrounded by forests, and oftentimes you could come across some junkies lurking in the forest while walking home from shops. However, despite that, I usually felt very safe in my house, staying with 4 big dogs and all. Nothing would ever really happen since most of my neighbors were my dad's friends, who were all in the army. For some reason, it gives this odd sense of safety, because who would be stupid enough to try and break in the area like that? Oddly enough, during that particular summer, a couple of break-ins happened on my street, but my parents still decided to leave me home alone, reassuring me I have nothing to worry because I have my dogs and our house is surrounded by a big fence. My fence has little spikes on top, so it's almost impossible to jump across it without hurting yourself. So, the first couple of days were fine. Nothing weird happened, except some thuds I heard in my garden, but I thought nothing of it, since usually it was just martins causing some mischief in my mom's flowers. It happened so often that even my dogs would ignore it at that point. 2 days passed, and I finally have to leave for shops, but due to lots of stuff to do throughout the day, I had to go in the evening when it was getting slightly dark outside. Very smart of me, I know. So I went shops, got my stuff, and would walk back home through the usual path. People would usually walk their dogs there, so it was quite busy in the evening because it was something in between a park and a forest. So I was casually walking, minding my own business, texting someone on my phone, when I noticed that some guy I passed suddenly stood up from a bench and started walking behind me. But again, thought maybe it's someone from my neighborhood that I don't recognize, and he's just walking in the same direction as me. So I exit the forest into a normal road where the houses start. I live right at the end of it. Guy is still walking behind me. I still think maybe he lives in one of these houses, but nope. I get to the last junction where my house is. Guy is still behind me, and at this point, I know he's not one of my neighbors, so my blood runs cold. Luckily, my neighbor who lives to the left of my house was outside watering his plants. He spotted me as I was walking by and started talking to me. He knew my parents are out of town and was so clearly concerned why I looked so stressed. So the guy who was walking behind me immediately noticed it and started running away again towards the forest, which ultimately gave me the creeps. He was clearly following me to my house. I called my parents to tell them that it happened, but again, they told me I have nothing to worry about. Our neighborhood is safe. I had my dogs with me, and so on and so on, so I try to calm down and go on with my things as usual. So for some more context, whenever my parents are out of town, I sleep in their bedroom downstairs, since I don't want my dogs to walk the stairs in the dark and possibly hurt themselves. That night, as usual, I was lying in bed, reading a book. My dogs are already soundly asleep in bed with me. I suppose that they could sense I was distressed because they usually sleep on the floor around the bed. I heard a thud coming from outside, like a little thud on the window in the room next to mine. Again, I thought it's just martins, but this time, my dog started growling at the window in my bedroom. A couple of seconds of silence, another thud, this time on the window in my bedroom. That already made me panic, but I tried to stay calm nonetheless. However, the third got louder, each coming from windows on the ground floor. Someone was banging on every window of my house, making my dogs go absolute apeshit, running around the house wherever the bangs were coming from. At that point, I was in tears, knowing exactly what was happening. So I got out of my bedroom and I walked to the center of my house. The house has an open plan, so all rooms, where I can see the main door. And here's the thing, my main door has a window in it so you can see inside. So I sat down in the darkness a couple feet away from the door, waiting on what's going to happen, hoping and praying that someone will get scared of my dog's barking. But nope, wasn't this lucky. First, I see my dogs rushing to the door, barking at it before there's anything there. But then I see a black silhouette outside my main door, peeking inside and then banging on the little window as I'm sitting there, helpless. I moved out of sight, hiding under my table. I got my phone out as I'm still hearing that man try to break the glass. I called my dad, barely being able to breathe. Didn't pick up. Right, it was like 2 a.m. and they were on holidays. I tried 2 times more until my mom picked up, very confused why I'm calling in the middle of the night. I managed to spit out, "Someone is trying to break in. I don't know what to do." At that point, the man was trying to open the door, banging with his whole body on the frame, to the point where my mom could hear it on the call. My dad was frantically trying to call everyone who could come and help me. His brother, my neighbors, my grandma. Everyone was put in a full mobility in that very moment to come here as fast as they could. My neighbors, the same one who spoke to me earlier that day, was the first one to come outside and scare that guy away. He rushed to my back garden, but I was still too afraid to open the main door, despite the fact that I could see the neighbor standing in front of it. I knew that man was still on my property, but the back of the garden was pitch black, and my neighbor didn't want to risk going out there on his own and potentially getting knocked out with something heavy. 10 minutes later, my uncle, aunt, and grandma pull up to my house, and I can see them all outside. My uncle had a key, so we opened the door, letting my dogs outside so they could chase after the intruder. My dogs are hunting dogs. They're not cute little puppies for strangers. My uncle and neighbor went to the backyard with torches, accompanied by my dogs, to check every corner and make sure it's safe now. I will never forget how my grandma and my aunt approached me when I was clinging onto the chair, absolutely in tears, as my mom was trying to figure out what's happening on the call. The man escaped through the back of the garden into my other neighbor's garden. I'm guessing trying to get away from my dogs, but he was finally gone. He didn't manage to damage the little window in my main door. The glass was already slightly cracked. The door itself got loose on the door hinges. I don't want to think about what could have happened if they did get into my house that quickly. This is my first post, but I just remembered this happened and wanted to share it before I forget again. Also, sorry for any spelling mistakes I may make. It was nearing Christmas of 2021, and by that I mean that it was mid-November. I live in the US, so Christmas and holiday items tend to go up in October. Being that I was, at the time, 16 female, I always try to get my shopping done early because a lot of my gifts were handmade. Some background. There are a lot of shops, small grocery stores, as well as the local uptown within walking distance of my house. It was at the uptown where this occurred. One of my brothers, Anthony, was really into music and learning different instruments, so I decided to go to the specific store in the uptown that sold music supplies. Because of my schedule, I wanted to be able to go well after 4 o'clock, which is when the sun started to set. In hindsight, I shouldn't have tried to go, but I was desperate enough to finish my gift shopping by the first week of December. I stopped at our local Dollar General to get some paint that I ran out of, then across the street to the uptown for Anthony's music supplies. While crossing the street, I saw a large brown truck stopped at the intersection. I hadn't seen a truck of that color in tow or ever before, so it was pretty noticeable. I also noticed that it was turning into the uptown parking lot, same as me. One thing about our uptown is that the majority of it is bars and restaurants, so there were quite a lot of people mingling around some of the bars. It did make me a bit nervous, but the music store was close, so I just decided to tough it out. As I was entering the store, the brown truck slowly crept behind me. I was kind of spooked, but figured whoever it was just being careful of the people. The store didn't end up having what I needed, so I placed an order for the following week and left the shop. By now, it was well into dusk. As soon as I left, I saw the truck parked right outside the store. I brushed it off as that they were just in the store next to me and went to leave. As soon as I turned my back, I saw the lights of the truck go on and the engine roared to life. I basically peed myself right there. I turned to look at who was in the car, but the windows were so heavily tinted that I don't know how they were able to see. The car pulls out and slowly creeps towards me, and I am paralyzed. I figure I was going to be kidnapped and murdered right then and there. I found my nerve to run when the car was only 6 feet away, and I booked it down the sidewalk. The car started to go faster to match pace with me, and the people from the bars didn't seem to notice or care. I was crying at this point, and I didn't know what to do. That's when I saw my saving grace. I saw 2 ladies, a little younger than my mom, outside a coffee shop that just closed. They spotted me too, and I took a chance and ran up to them and told them the situation. The pink shirt coffee lady had to leave, but gave the key to the lady in the blue shirt who offered to let me stay inside the cafe until my mom could come get me. The brown truck drove past a few times, but then gave up and left the way it came in. My mom showed up minutes later. I thank the blue coffee lady for her help, and I still go to their shop regularly. Thank you so much to the pink and blue coffee ladies, because you probably saved my life. And to the people driving that brown truck, please, let's never meet again. This happened to me around Christmas of 2015. I detailed what happened on my private social media accounts, and several women have messaged me and told me that they went through nearly identical situations at the same bookstore. I was pursuing a bookstore in my city around Christmas time. I was alert and often looking out for men following me. But this particular time, I was curious to see that just around every corner, whether I was browsing in nonfiction or fiction, a pair of older women were behind me or brushing by me to get to a shelf that I had just been looking at. The first woman was probably in her 70s, with a very exaggerated limp and making grunting noises with every movement. The second woman was possibly in her 60s and talking extremely loud to her partner about, "Ooh, check out this book. Look at the cover. It's so beautiful, interesting, weird." It became clear to me right away that they were turning up in every aisle I was in, not even seconds after I'd pick up a book. What ended up giving me the creeps was that I made it to the last aisle of comics. I had no interest or intent to look, but I was testing to see if I was followed. Sure fucking enough, these women trailed behind me and started grabbing books. Oh wow, look at how cool these little books are. I made eye contact with one of them and decided to bolt. One of the women, the younger of the two, was smiling widely at me, almost as if she recognized me. I leave the bookstore and paused at the front in order to let a car pass by, and then I hear an, "Excuse me, ma'am." I turn to see the woman walking up to me. One is still limping and now holding her shoulder as if she's in some kind of pain. The younger woman immediately begins saying in a very rushed, impatient voice, "Can you please help us? We have forgotten where we parked. I think it was somewhere towards the back. Can you please give us a ride around here until we see the car? Please, we're just a couple of old, fat ladies. We can't walk like we used to be able to." The last part threw me off. Who even says something like that unless it's some kind of weird guilt trip? Every alarm bell was going off in my head, and I just knew the limp was fake and their whole energy was shady. I was panicking and I felt primal even. For the first time in my life, I yelled, "Fuck you," to a complete stranger. I ran back into the store, told a cashier who was a bigger, muscular guy who went out to check the situation, possibly to see if the woman did really need help. Saw them wave down a car driven by a younger looking guy, as if they were waiting on him the whole time. They got in the car and left. Like I said earlier, there have been several more reports over the years of these women doing this at the same store. Always a pair of weird older women claiming that they need help to get to their car. Once they're refused or ignored, they get picked up anyway, I've heard. Now the bookstore has heightened security, but it gives me the creeps even to this day. I haven't heard anything about them in a while. I wonder what's happened, or if they've moved to a different spot. So this happened after work this past Christmas Eve. I work a later second shift from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. or until we're done. I should also mention that while the warehouse is in a nicer area, a couple blocks down, it gets sketchy at night. We got done around 2 a.m. and me and my one friend were the first out to the parking lot and were standing there talking while we were warming up our cars. We were talking for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and during the time, I saw this small sedan drive slowly by, but I didn't think much of it because it was a little icy out, and I figured that they were just being cautious. But then I saw it slowly coming back down the road, came from west and pulled in, and parked in the parking lot across from us, which was strange because it's a welding shop parking lot, and no one is ever there past 10 p.m., besides police doing speed traps. At that point, I pointed it out to my friend, and he said that he noticed it as well and thought that it was weird. Then this big dude got out of the car and walked across the street over to me and my friend while the car he got out of drove off. He asked my friend for a smoke, and as he did that, I walked over to my car to start scraping it off, and so he would hopefully just not talk to me. But as soon as I stepped back out of my car with my wallet in hand so I could use one of my cards to scrape the windows, he called over to me. I didn't want to be rude, even though something felt off about the situation, but I just said fuck it. There's cameras watching me, and the rest of the workers should be out within 10 minutes, so I'll be fine. I'm 6 feet, 180 pounds soaking wet, and the dude was a good bit bigger than me. I'm guessing he was 6'2" to 6'4", and a solid 250 pounds plus. He was trying to make small talk with me, asking about what we do there, how it sucks that we have to work on Christmas Eve, just random bullshit like that. But I got the feeling he was sizing me up. So even though I have extreme social anxiety and can usually barely make eye contact even with people I know, I remembered my grandpa always telling me if I'm in a sketchy situation with someone to stand tall, chest out a bit, make direct eye contact the entire time. Essentially do whatever to make you look like you aren't scared or nervous, so you look like you're more trouble than you're worth. I saw him keep looking down towards my wallet, so I took a small step back so I could make sure that I was in view of the cameras. Then he said,
So, hey man, do you think that you could give me a ride to my house? It's just right down the road. I ran out of gas at the store, and I need to go back to my house to get money.
Now, the grocery store he said his car ran out of gas at is about a mile down the road to the east, but yet the dude came from the west. And also, if he needed a ride to his house in the west, why wouldn't he have just gotten one from the person who came from that direction in the first place? I then remember reading online somewhere that around the holidays, people would do whatever they can to try to get someone to give them a ride, and then they force them to take them back to their house and rob them. At this point, I'm like, fuck this. This dude is trying to rob me, so I just walk backwards towards my car, since I know I have a giant utility knife under the seat, and tell him I'm good and to please get off our company property. And he was like,
Come on, man, it's Christmas Eve.
while looking visibly pissed, and I said, that sucks, dude, get off the property. At this point, I'm at my car, and he can see me reaching under the seat. He then turns and walks away and disappears in the alley a block away. I then go over to my friend's car to tell him what happened, and he said that the dude was trying to get him to give him money for smokes, and then he tried to get him to give him a ride to the ATM. 2 days later, a picture of the same guy is on the local police department's Facebook page, asking for information on him because he was wanted in relation to a string of armed robberies that happened during Christmas week. Not sure if this is a glitch in the Matrix per se, but definitely uncanny. Backstory: I used to live in another state for a few years before moving back to my home state. In this other state, I started my first job at a grocery store. I was a typical innocent good girl who loved her job and could cake on the cheese for the customers and actually looked like a normal, happy human being. This got me a good reputation with our regulars, and I would often help the elderly with heavy groceries into their car. Around this time, the weather was turning and it was becoming bone-chillingly cold out with vicious wind. One of my regulars saw that I didn't have a heavy coat, let alone gloves, and she surprised me with a gift one day. I opened up the little bag and she kindly gifted me a pair of unique knitted green gloves. They were long and had been specially knit to have a left and right hand. I was touched. I thanked her genuinely and wore the gloves every winter for as long as I was in the state. When I moved back to my home state, at some point, I lost that pair of gloves. I don't know how, I don't know where, but it was early 2012. Fast forward to 2017, and I am just getting to know a coworker on a more non-work level, and we decided to hang out at her house for the first time. I'm just getting to know her, and we had some deep conversations, and somehow the subject of gloves come up. I told her I needed some actually, as I lost my pair a while back, and she goes to her closet to grab a shoebox on the top shelf. She says she actually has a whole box of gloves that she's found over the years, and I can gladly take a pair. She's digging through the box, sets out a few pairs, and of the whole box full, she says, "How about these?" and has the same pair of gloves I once had. My jaw drops. She sees my face, and I'm like, no way. She looks confused as I do, and I'm like, you're not gonna believe this, but those are actually my gloves I lost a few years ago. And she's like, are you sure? And I told her my story of how a customer gifted them to me, and she's like, whoa, I just got a chill. Synchronicity. We had a deep friendship for years after that. She was very spiritual and taught me a few things and made a huge impact on my life. But, unfortunately, she met a toxic guy and she just let him control her life, and she became unrecognizable. Now that I type this, the last gift she ever gave me was a pair of new gloves with foxes on them before we stopped talking to each other over that psychopathic guy. But I just thought it was pretty crazy that she, of all people, had my pair and instinctively gravitated towards that pair to give to me. I was debating whether or not to post this, but I was sitting having a conversation with my boyfriend, both of us having a cigarette in the bedroom. I stopped smoking like a month ago for anyone about to tell me that this is a bad habit. We like to use those cup-like car ashtrays that have a screw-on lid for convenience and cleanliness purposes. My ashtray was on my bedside table. I was sitting facing forward with a bedside table and bright blue ashtray clear in my peripheral vision, maybe 65-ish degrees relative to my position. I lost focus on it for a moment as I looked down at the cigarette to assess the ash buildup and see if I needed to ash it. I did. This was probably a fraction of a second, just a quick glance. I turned to the ashtray I expected to be there. It was gone. The bedside table was hardwood, and there was nowhere for it to roll because of other items on the table. I did look anyway, because what is someone even supposed to think? What else is there to do? Absolutely gone. Wasn't on the floor. Couldn't possibly fit in the narrow gap between the bed and floor. I didn't really have time to think further on this as the cigarette was still burning. I got up and used my boyfriend's ashtray. He was a few steps away, almost directly opposite me, facing my direction in his PC chair. I put out the cigarette and go sit back on the bed. Boyfriend swivels in his chair to check something on his PC, and then I see the ashtray fall from somewhere above my field of vision and smack loudly into the bedside table, rocking slightly from the impact. There were no shelves near me. We had no pets. The cupboards next to me were built into the wall. Unless I somehow momentarily lost complete sanity and placed the ashtray on a blade of the ceiling fan without my boyfriend seeing, I don't understand how this is possible. Anyone have any theories? This happened in Ontario, Canada, during the winter of 2012. I was walking home from work at around 3 a.m. The temperature was well below zero, and the walk was long. There was a large parking lot without a single car, and it was covered entirely with freshly fallen snow. Not drifts, a fresh, even, light snowfall of a few centimeter tops. Now I get to the glitch in the matrix part that I will never be able to explain. In the middle of this snowy parking lot was footprints. One set like the invisible man was standing there or someone flew away. I don't know. I need to make this more clear. The entirety of the parking lot was undisturbed snow. No footprints leading to the single set of footprints in the middle, and no footprints were leading away from them. There was nobody standing in the middle of the parking lot, and furthermore, there was no tire tracks in the snow. It was completely fresh and undisturbed, evenly distributed snowy parking lot, other than the impossible footprints in the middle. The world record long jump would not make that distance if jumping comes to mind as an explanation, and there was no snowdrifts to have covered the trail of the footprints. The footprints were like running shoes and looked like they had just been made, as the snow had not had the chance to fall where they were. There was no way I know of that anyone could have made the footprints without walking to or away from their location, which boggles my mind. Regretfully, I did not approach the footprints and was sure to keep my trail at a distance from them to preserve the integrity of the scene. In hindsight, I should have approached or yelled at the footsteps or done anything to explain them other than observe. It's not a big deal, but I will wonder for the rest of my life about it nonetheless. If I was not clear on anything or you have further questions, please ask. But most importantly, please try and explain this. Thanks. Okay, so for a tiny bit of background, I used to work at this drive-up coffee shop that sells coffee and snacks like bagels and muffins, etc. I live in a relatively small town, 10 to 15,000 people, and I had never had anything like this happen before, so I was pretty shaken up. Alrighty, so it was Sunday night, and I was closing all by myself for the first time ever, being a new hire. And it was getting kind of late, and virtually no one was coming through, so I was just doing some closing activities like sweeping and mopping, etc. This is important because we store the mop and broom in a separate closet that can only be accessed by going outside and unlocking the room with a key. So I had the employee entrance door unlocked since I was going in and out. It started to get dark, and I'm due to leave in about an hour when this old Ford drives up. The driver was an older man, maybe 40 or so. I wasn't too fazed by it though, because a lot of people work on oil rigs in my town, and if they are on a night shift, they'll stop for a pick-me-up before making the 3-hour drive out to the rigs. I open the window, ask him what he'd like to order, etc. This is where it gets weird. He didn't order any coffee or food. No. He asked me,
"Are you working alone?"
I most certainly was working alone, and even both of my managers were no longer in the neighboring pawn shop that they also own, and I just feel my blood run cold. Thankfully, I'm smart enough to lie and respond with, "Oh no, my coworker will be back in a second, and my manager is coming here in about 5 minutes. He needs to take inventory." At this point, the man looks past me into the shop, directly at the cracked door behind me, and gives me this really creepy smile before pulling forward and signaling to turn around on a road that goes right next to the open door. As soon as he could no longer see me, I jump over, slam the door shut, and lock the doorknob and deadbolt. I was worried to leave the building that night because I didn't want to walk across the parking lot to my car. I thought he might be lingering around the area, waiting for me to get off work. I'm really glad that I never told him I was working by myself. That was the creepiest encounter I've ever had at work. This is an experience I had when I was 16, during the summer of 1995. I was a junior in high school. I was a theater nerd, and I hung out with my 2 besties, Stella and Chris, a lot. Chris was short for Chrissy. At night, we usually picked up a few friends, bought beer and smokes at the local liquor store with one of our fake IDs, and then headed up to the reservoir or a local parking lot to enjoy our illicitly obtained goods. This particular Friday night, I was driving my dad's 1976 Mercedes 450 SL. I was buying it from him with payments over time. It was in decent shape and ran strong, but was 19 years old, so it had a few minor issues. One was that the passenger side door could only be rarely locked automatically using the lock from the driver's side, relevant later. I picked up Stella, Chrissy, and Ted around 8 p.m. We were feeling good and extra happy because it was Friday. Ted had to go in the front seat because he was 6'1", and the back seat would barely allow two small people, Stella and Chris, to sit there. We drove to our favorite liquor store just down the road from the reservoir, and Ted and Stella got out to get ciggies and beer, while Chris and I stayed in the car chatting. About a minute after our friends walked into the liquor store, an old Chevy van pulled up about 6 feet behind me, blocking me in. At first, I thought it was just a drunk townie being dumb. Then, a thin, pale woman with shoulder-length brown hair came around to my passenger side window and tried to start up a conversation with me and Chris. The woman's eyes were dilated, and she said something about how she and her friends were amateur movie makers, and she was looking to cast us in their next gig. Chris and I exchanged a look, and we were both on the same page of WTF is this woman talking about. I had a bad feeling and a very strong sense that the woman was going to try to get into my car, so I subtly started hitting the lock button, hoping that it would take. The woman was just babbling at this point, and she put her hand on my passenger side door handle, but literally the second before she tried opening the door, my sweet little Mercedes freaking finally obeyed my frantic tapping and locked the door with a loud click. The woman looked confused for a second. She tried the handle again, but my car was locked. Now I was scared and pissed. I knew the curb weight of a 76 450 SL was about 4K. The Chevy van behind me may have been blocking me and had curb weight up on me, but it was top heavy. I bet I could do a lot of damage to it if I slammed into it with my foot on the floor, especially if I did so repeatedly. So I said, very loudly, "Lady, take your hands off my fucking car. Step the fuck away. You go tell your friends that they need to move their fucking van now because I'm going to floor it in reverse and tear into your shit van like it's a piece of tinfoil." I turned my keys and revved my engine. It purred like the sweet little gas-sucking powerhouse it was, and my car swayed back and forth with each rev. I was not bluffing, and I think the woman saw it. The woman's eyes got wide, and she ran back to the van, screaming, "Go, go, move!" As she was running back to the van, I saw a thin dude with long, stringy hair running out of the liquor store towards the van, too. He jumped in the back, and the van peeled out, leaving a shower of gravel and gray exhaust in its wake. About 10 seconds later, my friends Ted and Stella came walking out of the liquor store. My adrenaline was super flowing, and I was relieved to see them. Chris and I told them what happened, and they shared their experience. They said the guy who went into the liquor store had just walked up past them and started rambling about some random weird Jesus and Bible stuff to the clerk. He also said something to my friends about them looking open-minded and gave Stella major creep vibes when he looked her over. The guy at the counter had just listened for a few minutes while my friends waited patiently to buy smokes. Then the guy heard the revving and screaming and bolted out the door. The clerk asked my friends if the man was with them, and they said heck no. He said he thought that they were all together, or he would have told the guy to leave because he sounded crazy. So my friends bought the beer and smokes and walked out. We all thought that this was pretty weird shit. To this day, I am so grateful my door locked. Whatever that woman and her friends wanted, it wasn't good. I was living in Tampa, Florida in 2018, right when there was a serial killer announcement. The news reported they caught the guy a few weeks later, but to this day, my gut still tells me they got the wrong guy. So, here's my story. It was April 20th, 2018, so you know what I was doing, and a lot of it. But keep in mind, at this point in my life, I was a constant stoner for 7 years. Weed didn't affect me in the same way. My boyfriend at the time and I agreed to start the night at different friends' houses, since his friends didn't smoke and mine did, topped with the fact that I was about to move to a different state, and it would be the last time I would see my friends for a while. So around 10 to 11 p.m., I would take an Uber to get to his friend's house. The night was highly normal up until this point. So I ordered the Uber, and the Uber driver drops off my friends at their houses along the way. So being the person I am, I strike up a conversation for the 30-minute ride. How are you doing? Are you seeing a lot of high people tonight? My normal questions. I hate silence, and this is who I am as a person. After we get through some small talk, he starts asking where I'm going, and I explain everything above. He asks why I'm not partying with my boyfriend at the time, and my dumbass explains I'm not sure if we're going to make it with the move, and he doesn't love me anymore. Then he starts asking if my mom knows where I am, if people know I'm coming, and when does my friends we just dropped off expect me home? Do I live with them? And thankfully, I caught on that these were weird questions to ask someone traveling alone. So I started lying, saying my mom is expecting me to call as soon as I arrive, and how I was getting texts in the group chat to tell them when I was at the other party, safe. Once we arrived, of course, like the fucking horror movie this night was feeling like, the other friend's house was in the woods on the edge of Tampa, and my high ass was in overdrive trying to figure out how to get out of this one. We finally can see my friend's house and a little bonfire about 300 feet away when he stops and says this is where he'll drop me off. I ran out of that car ASAP, and he hightailed it out right as I closed the door. Thank God I didn't leave anything in the Uber. I know it's not the craziest encounter, but my gut is rarely wrong about these things. I didn't think about this again until I saw the news when they announced that they caught the guy. I don't know. I hope this was worth being late to work to type out. So, for context, I'm a 22-year-old male and I live in a large city in the Midwest. Now, I drive for Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. I have many horror stories from those as well, but I'll tell those another time. It was Christmas Eve 2020. I was running Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mom's with my new baby and wife. Nothing special going on for the night, just the usual. I get a ride request. It was a pickup from this kind of lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive, and I find my passenger. He has all his belongings, several boxes of stuff. Now, my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not too big. We get all of his stuff loaded up, barely, and are on our way. During the ride, he's crying, saying his girlfriend was cheating on him and he had walked in on them earlier that night. He couldn't stay there because it was her name on the lease, so I was taking him to a motel. Now, in my city, we have a street that is, well, known for having vices. Sex workers, drugs, gangs, weapons, and shady motels. The works. We get to the motel. He asks me to wait for him to check in and get his key. No problem, man, I say. I'll confess, I break the rules a little when it comes to Lyft. I have a gun hidden in a concealed holster secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reason being, driving Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as people have tried to fight me, rob me, and all kinds of other things. But, like I said, another time. This motel was on that street I mentioned before. Homeless people were everywhere. There was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm, passed out against the building. And I'm a big fan of true crime and horror narration, so I'm on edge. He gets his key, the whole motel is ground level, so to help the guy out, I drive to his door. As I mentioned before, he had a lot of stuff, so I started to help him unload his stuff. While on my second trip getting stuff, I saw a guy come out of a room just to the south of my car, followed by two ladies. They came up to the room I was next to, not my passenger. One of the ladies pounded on the door, then opened it. That's when I saw the guy raise a fucking shotgun up out of his long coat and storm into the room. The two ladies followed him, slamming the door behind them. Following, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting. I was just waiting for shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up behind me. I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas. And he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice he took the boxes out of my hands and slid a $5 bill in my pocket. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going down in the room. I had to leave, or at least get to where I could get my gun. I know the guy and both ladies saw me, and I know they knew I saw the gun. I had to get out of there. You know, no witnesses. I got in my car and sped away quickly. I got a block or so away and called the cops. I gave them every detail. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out of Lyft. I hadn't made much money, but I was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found the gunman or the women. They never answered the door I saw them come out of. And the occupants of the room they went into said nothing had happened and that I was full of shit. Well, I know what I saw. So to the gunman I saw with the shotgun, who I'm sure was making a statement to someone about a debt, let's not meet again. This happened in 2005 during Christmas vacation. I moved away for college and came back home to visit for the holidays. Spent a week in my hometown in a snowy state. On my last night there, my friend and I decided to go sledding at 3 a.m. We get in her car and both go down a few times. We're both at the top of the hill. She gets ready to go again, but I stop her. She asks what's wrong, and I tell her that I had a bad feeling. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and I felt nervous. I told her we need to leave now. We drive back to my family home. We live in a town where no one locked their doors. The crime was always nothing, and all the neighbors knew each other. When we got back, something told me to lock all the doors. Then I checked the windows, and several were unlocked. My flight was only 4 hours away to go back to campus. I slept for maybe 2. I wanted to see the snow and smell the fresh air, so I stepped outside. I looked at a huge pine tree we had in the front side of our yard. I always thought the way the snow laid on the branches looked so beautiful, and something caught my eye. What should have been pure, fresh snow was littered in huge man-sized footprints. They wrapped around the tree and went towards the backyard. I was thinking maybe my uncle had been out there smoking or something, just thinking of any way to rationalize why those prints were there. The same feeling came back to me when we were sledding, the anxious and paranoid feeling in the pit of my stomach. I look to my left and I see a man. He is running. He is sprinting, staring straight at me. He was probably close to 300 pounds and maybe 6 feet. And for his size, he was super fast. I froze in fear with realization that he's not just doing a morning jog, and he's coming to me. I tried to move several times, but I was almost too scared. With everything in me, I opened my front door, slammed it shut, and locked it. I run to the window and look onto my porch and see the man standing there. He had his hand on my door. He turns his head, and I follow his gaze to a man in a white van. The guy in his van throws up his hands in a gesture to say, "Well?" The runner just threw up his hands and shook his head. The runner walks to the van, gets in, and they drive away. My heart still pounding, I wake up my friends and make her walk around the house with me. There we find the footprints went to every door and window around my house. She too tried to rationalize it, but to me, I know if he had reached me, I wouldn't be writing this post. The malicious look on his face as he ran towards me told me everything. It was Christmas Eve and I was a freshman in high school. My family has been split up for some time, so normally we trade off of Christmas Day and Christmas Eve every year. And this year, I had come home early from my grandparents' Christmas party, while everyone else was at my aunt and uncle's, celebrating at another party. When I was dropped off, my cousins offered to stay with me for a few hours, yet I declined. I thought I could watch some of my new DVDs and get some alone time in the house, which is a rarity. I had noticed an unfamiliar car parked on the street, but I didn't think anything of it, considering it was Christmas Eve, probably a neighbor's relative or something. After I got inside, I locked the door, grabbed snacks, and started to settle down. I hadn't been home for more than 15 minutes when there was a knock at the door. I unlocked the door and opened it only a crack to see a man standing there. Dark hair, glasses, slightly overweight, and dressed casually. He didn't look like much of a threat, but my stomach dropped. He asked,
I was wondering about the car outside. Is it for sale?
I told him I didn't think so.
Is there someone here I can talk to about it?
I said, and quite stupidly, I might add, "No, you can come back another time." And I shut the door and turned the lock as fast as I possibly could. He reached for the handle immediately and started pounding on the door. I heard a string of profanities and the pounding stopped. Terrified, I was crawling on the floor to the phone, hoping he wouldn't be able to see me through one of the windows. Then I heard the noises. Our house had an open garage door and it led through to the laundry room where the door lock was broken and no one had bothered to fix it. Just then, I heard a man yell, and I saw the man through the window run to his car and drive off. My uncle had gotten home just in time and scared the man off. Who knows what would have happened if he hadn't made it home in time. Sadly, we didn't get the plate number and nothing ever came of it, but I'll never be home alone on a holiday again. First off, I'm living very rural in a small village with maybe 10 to 15 houses, but close to the highway. You can drive there within maybe 5 minutes, and also about 10 minutes away from town. If you cross the street, it just takes you about a 10-minute walk to reach the forest. First Christmas Day. In the afternoon, my partner and I decided to go for a little digestive walk as we were really stuffed from all the food. It was about 5 o'clock and already dark when we left, and we had a big and bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and my flash as I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk on a little country road towards the forest and then turn right, following a small gravel cycle track close to the forest border, which connects our village and the next, maybe 15 to 20 minutes walk between villages. In the middle part of the track, you have to walk through a small bit of forest. It's rather dark, and the trees are very high and quite dense. When we entered, I saw our flashlight reflecting on something and recognized a car being parked there on the side of the track, close to the trees. This struck me as odd, as cars are not allowed to drive there and the path is very narrow and hidden, so I was a bit cautious. My partner pointed the light inside of the car and it seemed to be empty. I also noticed the windows were frozen, so it must have been parking there for a while. A bit in front of the car, I spotted a tree with an intriguing structure, and I asked my partner to point the flashlight towards it so I could focus better and photograph it with my flash. After I took a few images, my partner told me, there is someone standing behind us in the middle of the road. He's looking at us. Nobody was following us the whole way. I kept looking around and behind us occasionally because at this time in the evening and close to the border of the forest, there are boars sometimes, and it's mating season, so they are more aggressive than usual. Indeed, there was a man standing behind us, staying out of the flashlight's reach. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there and facing us. At first I thought he might be startled, as it may seem a bit weird if someone's just taking photos around your car. It was not even legal to drive on that path with that car. I decided to get up and confront him from a distance, explaining to him that I was just taking photos of that tree. He didn't react and still just stood there. I then went on to ask him if he needed some light, and he replied that this wasn't necessary. It was odd, but I was still calm, sure about there being a normal explanation for his behavior. Nonetheless, my partner and I decided to just GTFO and followed the path leading to the next village. It was maybe 5 to 7 minutes until we reached it. I remembered the letters on his license plate, not the numbers though, unfortunately, and Googled it, and it turned out that he was from a city about 6 hours away from our village. Mind you, the country I live in is in a very strict lockdown right now, so you are only allowed to travel, even by car, if you have very urgent reasons. After we reached the first lantern of the next village, we looked back and observed the car driving a bit out of the forest, turning around and going back inside. I was able to see that he parked there again and turned the lights off. He didn't leave the forest. We then went home on a much longer way than initially intended, as I didn't want to go back there for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died on the way, and my phone battery was low, so I didn't want to call the police back then, but I called them as soon as I arrived home, and I gave them all the details. Big regret that I didn't memorize the whole license plate, but it was just so surprising that I seriously didn't think about it. Also, it only occurred to me as really strange when I thought about the frozen windows and that he couldn't possibly have walked behind us, plus him having no light and not responding. He didn't seem to be sneaking up on us when I sat down to take the photo. I think I was very lucky to have my partner, the camera, and the bright light with me. I don't want to imagine what could have happened if I was alone. So, creepy guy sneaking around the forest. Let's not meet. Edit. When I told my housemate, she theorized that he may have been spying on the houses very close to the forest border, as you can easily look into their backyards without being seen. You have to walk a bit up the hill and further about 5 minutes. I think it's likely. I had the thought of photographing the car when I entered the forest part of the path, but somehow I felt unwell about it and decided not to do it, despite it being an interesting scene. In hindsight, I believe this saved me, as he must have hidden behind the trees, close to the car and the forest entrance. If he was really planning a burglary, or worse, dumping a body, I think it's not unlikely that he may have attacked me if he realized I had a potential photo of his car with a recognizable license plate. Update. We went back and found a tape marking on one of the trees, a very small hideout, more to store things than to sit in, as well as some cut-off part of a backpack. This was my first incident of ever being followed, harassed, stalked, whatever you want to call it. I made it nearly 30 years on this earth. I suppose something like this had to happen sometime. It's probably relevant to the story to start off with the fact that I'm female, and also that I'm a huge fan of this band called Ghost. If you don't know who they are, they're a metal band from Sweden, and their most hardcore fans are really hardcore, as you'll see. Anyway, I have this Ghost shirt that is a bootleg copy of an extremely rare shirt, and I honestly love it. When I bought it, it wound up being way too small to wear, but since I dropped a bunch of weight recently, yay anxiety, I celebrated by putting it on and making a trip to the mall, mostly to pick up a new album I wanted. So I'm just browsing through the mall's music store, not particularly finding what I wanted, but just seeing if they had any other cool shit, when this dude, I don't know, sort of makes his way towards me and also starts to browse. I don't pay him any mind. I figured he was just a fellow metal fan, given his Gojira shirt. He was actually kind of good looking, so I didn't get the creep vibe at all. I'm flipping through the secondhand CDs when I hear this dude start talking.
You like Ghost?
It sort of took me a second to realize that he was talking to me. I space out a lot and honestly hate small talk. Like, it makes me want to lay down in traffic. So it caught me off guard and I almost pretended not to hear him. But he said it again. I guess I couldn't ignore him, and to be honest, a lot of random metalheads you meet turn out to be pretty cool. Yeah, I said, trying to sound nothing more than polite, and also making sure he saw my wedding ring. They're my favorite. It sort of made me feel uncomfortable when he didn't smile and start going, "Yeah man, I saw them back when," or some shit like that. He just looked at me like I'd said fuck your mother. Now this is weird feeling starts kicking in, and I just go back to pretending to be interested in a CD. He didn't take the hint because the next thing out of his mouth was,
"That shirt is a bootleg. It's bootlegged."
I look back at him with a really bitchy expression, like, leave me alone, man. All I said was, "Yeah, it is," and decided to get the fuck out of Dodge before I had to listen to some pretentious metal elitist rant. Dude just keeps staring at me with that shitty expression until I'm out of the store, and I think that's the end of it. I decide to check out Hot Topic. Shut up, I know. To see if they had any Behemoth shirts, and by this point, I had totally forgotten about Shirt Man. I'm just sort of picking through the shirts and feeling more than a little pissed off at the lack of actual metal tees and the excess of tiny bopper shit like Bieber or whatever. And then I turn around and there's the fucking guy again. It sort of startled me to see him there, and for a split second, I thought that it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was trying to find his kid or whatever, but that all went to shit. when he looks at me, looking pissed off this time, and says,
"That fucking shirt is a bootleg. Do you know how disrespectful that is?"
I'm legitimately not the nicest person in the world if you push my buttons, so I match his pissy expression and tell him, "Look, man, I don't give two shits if it's bootlegged or not. It's a badass shirt and I'll wear whatever I want. Excuse me." And I shoved past him as rudely as possible, told the cashier, who I knew from being there a lot, that I'd be back in like an hour to pay for the shit that she had behind the counter, and left. This time I'm angry as fuck, and I'm texting both my husband and my dad at this point about this motherfucker, so at least they know where I was and what was going down. After I blew my stack, I felt better, and again, brushed this douche off. The last thing on my day at the mall agenda was to get my nails done, so I go to the salon, and as I'm getting my acrylics put on, I look out of the side of the salon. It's like a big wall of windows, so you can see out into the mall. And holy shit, there's this motherfucker, once again, looking mad as hell. What the fuck is his problem? I thought to myself. The rational side of my brain kept trying to tell me that maybe he's having a shitty day, and I was a convenient target or whatever, and that maybe his girl is getting her nails done too. This place was packed. Another half hour or so goes by, and this fucker hasn't budged an inch. Shit, I don't even know if he blinked. I was really fucking freaked out by now. And with the hand that wasn't getting manicured, I'm frantically texting my husband, dad, and older brother, saying, "Look, whichever one of you is closest to the mall, get here now." My dad lives like 5 minutes up the road from the mall, and he's always armed. So he says, "Don't worry, baby, I'm on my way," which made me feel a lot better, and I'm so glad I decided to text my dad, because shit really got wild once I walked out of the nail place. No sooner do I set one fucking foot out of the salon, this creep comes rushing right the fuck up to me, red-faced and literally screaming,
"Your shirt is bootlegged. It's fucking bootlegged. You don't give a shit about Ghost. You disrespect them all."
And he keeps going on and on and on, calling me every name in the fucking book. I am honestly pretty tough, but when you've got a guy who has a foot and at least 50 pounds on you, it's hard not to be scared. Shirt guy is towering the fuck over me, and by this point, I'm crying. I can't believe no one ever called mall security or the cops or whatever, but I think they assumed he was like my asshole boyfriend or something. Not a great excuse, but that's all I could figure. My dad picked the perfect time to show up, because this dude was literally a second away from fucking grabbing me or hitting me or something. And I gotta be honest, I was about ready to literally piss my pants. My dad is an enormous guy, former Navy, literally built like a tank with a Desert Eagle on his hip. That's when I hear him yell,
"You got a fucking problem, buddy?"
with his hand on that big-ass gun. I run like a scared little baby behind my dad, and this fucker actually tries to yell at my dad, but once he saw that fucking gun, he scampered. My dad rode me in his truck over to my car and then followed me back home, just to make sure that asshole didn't follow me. And he stayed with me until my husband got home. Thank the fucking Lord, I'm a daddy's girl. Asshole who takes other people's shirt way too personally. I don't ever want to meet you again. This happened yesterday, and I can't stop thinking about what would have happened if I couldn't get away. I was at the mall with my 2 little cousins, under 6 years old, and a classmate, while my mother was at an appointment. After an hour, my classmate went home, and I was left alone with my little cousins. I ended up going with them to a playground inside the mall, and I watched my cousins while they played. I started to get paranoid, thinking someone was going to take them, so I became very aware of my surroundings. After about 20 minutes, we decided to leave the park and go upstairs on the escalators. An old man was coming down the stairs. He looked at me and my cousins and went back up. I realized he was looking at us, and I had a really bad gut feeling, so I immediately pulled my cousins closer to me. As I couldn't see the man anymore, I calmed myself down and took my cousins to a mini carousel on the floor we were. I live in a small town, so it's not very common for the mall to be full, especially in the pandemic, so there was no one on or around the carousel. After about 2 minutes, as I took my younger cousins off the carousel, and as I turned around, I saw the man right behind my back, just looking at us. I didn't know for how long he was just standing there, but at that moment, I was already terrified, and I took my cousins and left. The corridors have 2 sides, divided by empty spaces that give a view to the lower floor with some passages between them, so that you can pass to the other side of the corridor. I went to the left, and the man went to the right. My first thought was to go inside a store, so I told my cousins that we were going to see some dresses for them. As I was telling them this, that fucker goes through one of those passages and goes to my side of the corridor right behind me. I keep my plan to enter the store. It could be that he didn't enter the store, and if he did, I could ask an employee for help. But when I enter, the man enters behind me. I legit almost shit my pants. I went with my cousins to near the cash registers where there were more people, and the man stood near the entrance. He didn't pick up or look at any clothes. He just looked around the store, I assume maybe trying to find me. At this point, I had completely abandoned my previous plan of asking an employee for help, and when the man turned his back to go where I was, by the opposite path, I told my cousins we were going for a run and left the store, running with them to the elevators. We managed to go downstairs, but the remaining time we spent in the mall, I was very restless. My city has a history of human trafficking, so I think when the man saw me alone with my cousins, he assumed that we were easy targets. Or I could just be being paranoid. I was around 13 years old and at the shopping center with my parents. I wanted to go off on my own and wander around by myself for a while, and my parents agreed. After a little while, I was stopped by a woman in casual clothes. She told me that she was an undercover cop and I was suspected of shoplifting. Because I was young, I was terrified. I didn't ask her for ID or anything like that. I didn't know I could question authority. She asked to look through my bag, and I let her, insisting I hadn't stolen anything. She asked me how old I was, who I was there with. Then she asked me something that still sends chills down my spine.
Are your parents expecting you to go home with them tonight?
I told her, of course they were. Why wouldn't they be? She then insisted that I had to follow her to go and figure out this shoplifting thing. I went. She was leading me towards the exit. By the grace of God, before we got there, we bumped into my dad. He asked what was going on, and I told him. As I was explaining the situation, the woman got on her phone and was talking to someone, saying things like,
"Oh, this isn't the right girl?"
Then hangs up and says,
"Sorry, wrong person,"
and abruptly walks off. My dad and I stood there, dumbfounded. When my mom found out about the situation, she was really unimpressed by the way the undercover cop handled the situation. She took me to center management the next day and complained to them about how I was treated by their undercover cop. When the woman answers, "We don't employ undercover cops in this center." I have no idea what that woman had planned for me, but I thank my lucky stars every day that we ran into my dad. I'm a woman, so I have so many, but here's one of the weirdest. It's gonna be a bit long, and I apologize. I was 16, in a group of 5 girls who had just left a big New Year's concert party. It was maybe 3:30 a.m., and we were walking back to one of the girls' apartments who lived closest to the venue for a sleepover. We were tipsy and chatting. As is common in larger groups, the chatting had split into 2 groups, one of 3, with me walking in front, 2 more lagging a little behind. I tended to be very aware of my surroundings. I had noticed a guy walking behind all of us, but he was alone, showed no interest, so I dismissed him. Then, for some reason I can't remember, the group decided to cross the street and walk on the other sidewalk. I noticed the guy cross too behind us. After about 30 seconds, we decided, nope, other sidewalk was better, and crossed back over. The guy crosses back too. Okay, that's not a coincidence. Now he's got my attention. I side-eye my friend, and no words are necessary. She spotted him too, and it's weird. The 3 of us gently pick up the pace. The 2 behind us notice nothing and start lagging farther and farther behind. I think, great, how do I get them to realize what's going on without tipping off the creeper that we're onto him? I ask one of them for something from her purse and slow down, but I don't stop, hoping that will make her speed up to catch up with me. It kind of works, and when she's in earshot, I hiss, "Move your ass. There's a creeper behind you. Let's get back to the apartment." She rolls her eyes at me, thinking I'm being dramatic, but speeds up a little. Second legger speeds up a bit to continue her conversation. All of this has made us slow down quite a bit, and so Creeper has significantly closed the distance. By the time we reach the apartment complex, we've practically leapt up the stairs. Our friend had gotten her keys out and ready, and opens the glass door as Creeper walks up the first step behind us. We manage to get everyone in just in time to close the door in the Creeper's face. Without missing a beat, Creeper just lifts his arms and starts double fist banging on the glass door, rattling it loudly in its frame. Legger friend lets out a squeal of fright. She didn't expect me to be right. The weirdest part? Creeper had no change of expression, no excuses, no laughing. He didn't even make eye contact with any of us. He just banged and banged on the door as if he had always intended to do so, and it had nothing to do with us. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably under a minute, he just dropped his arms, turned around, and strode off. We didn't want to see if he'd come back. We got our butts up to the apartment. I wonder about that night sometimes. What exactly were his intentions? What if we never double-crossed the street? It was 5 against 1, and not in the US, so a gun was highly unlikely. But what exactly was he thinking? What if we hadn't gotten the door shut on time? Maybe he was an excellent actor, just trying to scare us. Maybe not. Either way, he succeeded in creeping us the fuck out. I am in London, UK. We are in a Tier 4 lockdown. Stay in your home, only go out for one shopping trip or exercise. No mixing with people outside of your own home or support bubble, etc., etc. With a mutating strain of COVID-19 rampaging through London, hospital beds nearly at capacity, and death toll rising, it made sense to stay indoors as much as possible. but every human being has a breaking point, and mine was 8 days of wandering around my one-bedroom apartment. I had talked myself out on Zoom and had run out of conversations to talk to myself about. At 10 p.m. New Year's Eve, I decided to get some air, allowed within the rules of Tier 4, and go for a quick walk the perimeter around the local park, all on main roads. It takes about 40 minutes. The plan was to stop at a local grocery store and pick up a bottle of red wine on the way back. Stepped out with mask firmly affixed and started walking. One thing that I was not prepared for was the eerily empty and almost silent streets. As it was just below freezing, I decided to hustle and cut through some side streets first. In hindsight, a big mistake. Navigating myself through very quiet side streets, I neared the park when I saw a van, Mercedes Sprinter size, turn in and rapidly approach me. Deciding to let them pass before crossing, I came to a halt. The van began to slow as it approached me. I could see the cab was occupied by 2 men, between 25 to 40 years of age. Then it stopped. Window rolled down. One man leaned out.
Hey friend, we are lost. Can you tell me to so-and-so station?
The accent was not from the UK, and I'm not going to state its origin, as I'm not going to get into stereotypes. Alarm bells began to ring out immediately. What was a van doing out at this time, and why directions to the local train station in the middle of a Tier 4 lockdown? The van had stopped, so the side door was facing me. I stepped back a few paces and gave directions very quickly.
I did not understand at all. I think best if you show us.
With that, he opens his door, and the side door to the van is open to reveal another 2 men. I just turned and ran down the side street that I had emerged from.
Shit, take the van around. I follow him.
Knowing that these guys were fitter and younger than I, a foot trace to my apartment building was out of the question. The only advantage that I had was a head start and hopefully local knowledge of the streets. The side streets lead into a larger street that has homes all with large hedges. I ran past a few homes and entered the front garden of a house that had the most imposing and opaque hedge. It was unlit. I ducked down. Lucky for me, that house did not have a motor sensor light. Within a few seconds, I could hear footsteps. They went past me, stopped. I peeked through the hedge vegetation, very limited view, to see the man who had asked for directions. He was a few houses down from me and on the opposite side of the street. He was looking around. Then the sound of the vehicle. I thought, oh no, the van. Lucky for me, it was a car. The man looked at his phone, looked around, pretending he was checking something, and then walked, leaving the residential street as quickly as possible. The car continued its way. I waited for another 10 minutes, sitting behind the hedge in the front garden, practicing an explanation if the house lights came on. The house stayed unlit, and after my allotted time, I rose and quickly walked back to my apartment building, keeping to shadows and reacting to every sound. I made it back, bolted the front door. Only when I sat down did I understand what I had just avoided. All this for some air and a bottle of red? I poured myself a black coffee and I debated calling the police. But what would I say? Had anything really happened that they could act on? Intuition of being kidnapped or being in danger is not enough evidence. Plus, being a man, this would not be a priority, especially on a night that they would be overstretched on. I just waited in the new year, realizing that I had a lucky escape and that I should stock up on red wine at a more decent time. This happened almost 4 years ago in the early hours of New Year's Day. For reference, I was 17 at the time and in my senior year of high school. I'm a male and I'm about 5'10" and weighed about 160 pounds at the time. I lived in the suburbs and I was at a New Year's party being held by my friend at his house, which was a 20-minute walk away from my house. It was about 1 in the morning and I was about to leave with another friend of mine who lived on the same block as me. My friend who was hosting the party asked if we would like a ride home, and in hindsight, we probably should have accepted his offer, but our neighborhood was pretty safe, and we figured that with the two of us walking together, no one would bother us. Plus, there was probably other people at the party who needed a ride home more than we did. We said our goodbyes to everyone and began our walk home. The road was predictably empty, with no one but us walking along the sidewalk, and maybe the occasional car passing by. It was pretty well lit though, so we weren't walking in complete darkness. My friend wanted to pick up a pack of cigarettes on the way home, so we stopped off at a gas station along the way. When we got to the gas station, it was nearly empty, with only a woman at a pump filling up her car with gas, and a guy posted up in front of the store on his phone. We went inside, and my friend picked up a pack of cigarettes. We walked out of the store, and my friend immediately lights a cigarette. We reach the sidewalk, and we hear someone behind us yell,
Hey, wait.
We look behind us to see the guy who was in front of the store quickly walking towards us. He looked to be in his early to mid-20s. He was probably about 5'8" and maybe 140 pounds from the looks of him. He approached us and asked if he could get a light. My friend and I didn't think much of it, and he lit the guy's cigarette. The guy thanked him, and my friend said, "You're welcome." We began walking away when the guy continued to follow us, asking where we were going. We told him we were heading home and asked him where he was going. He said his friends were at a party and he was heading back over there as he left to get some fresh air for a bit. He asks us if we wanted to come to the party. This is officially the point where red flags start going off with this guy. Why the hell would a guy in his 20s ask 2 teenage boys if they wanted to go to a party with him? We told him bluntly that we didn't even know who he was, nor did we know anyone at the party he was talking about, so we weren't going. He starts laughing and says that we seem like cool guys to party with. He told us that we needed to let loose a little. My friend and I told him that we were 18 and 17 respectively, to see if maybe that would get him to leave us alone. He chuckled and said that age didn't matter to him, and that he had a brother who was 16, and that he partied with him and his friends all the time. Jesus Christ, can't this guy take a hint? I thought to myself. We were a little less than 10 minutes away from our houses, and we didn't want this creep following us all the way there. I told him firmly, "Dude, we're not going anywhere with you. Now quit following us and fuck off." He gets livid and starts screaming at us for being unfriendly, inconsiderate assholes, and that he was just trying to be nice. He then starts throwing racial slurs at my friend. It's probably worth mentioning by now that I'm white and my friend is black. My friend yells at him to get away from him before he cracks him in the face, and the guy proceeded to run away from us. My friend and I look at each other in complete disgust over what happened and spent the next 5 minutes walking and talking about this creepy guy. We both agreed that he was probably drunk or high from a New Year's party. Next thing we know, we hear a car behind us and proceeded to slow down to match our pace. We see the windows roll down, which revealed the guy we had just seen a few minutes earlier, with who we presumed to be one of his friends. One of them was a man who was probably the same age as the guy, and a woman in the back seat who had to have been in her mid-30s. The guy tells us that we got off on the wrong foot and asks us once again to join them at the party. My friend and I looked at each other, and I whispered to him that we needed to get away from them. My friend tells them that we're not going with them and to leave us alone already. The guy was silent for a few seconds and said,
"You're coming with us, one way or another."
They pull over and quickly get out of the car, which caused my friend and I to immediately go into flight mode. We turned right on a side block and my friend yelled, "Run to the park, we'll lose them in there." We look behind us, and to our horror, the 3 people were running right for us. We run into the park and we once again look behind us, and they're getting closer. We run into the dark, thick patch of trees that covered a good portion of the west side of the park, hoping to evade them. I was panicking at this point because I couldn't see a damn thing, and I was worried that my friend and I would trip over something and get captured by one of those sick freaks who wanted to do who knows what with us. We hear one of them trip and fall behind us, yelling,
"Fuck!"
and luckily we see light again, and we make it to another path in the park, and we made a left onto the path. We heard yelling behind us, and one of the guys said that they lost us. The woman yells to split up and search around the park for us. We bolt towards the bathrooms, which thankfully were open, and we hide inside. We took a minute to catch our breath, as our lungs were practically burning at that point. We should have called the cops and just hid until they got there, but at the time, we were so focused on getting the hell away from those crazy people that we decided to try and make our way to the nearest exit of the park and run to my house. We waited for about 2 minutes, and we bolted out of the bathroom and towards the park exit. Shortly before we exited the park, we hear one of the guys yell behind us that he found us and we were getting away. We look behind us to see the guy in the distance starting to chase after us. We ran until we reached my house, and I quickly opened the door. We ran inside, and I quickly locked it. We went into my living room and collapsed on the couch. We both sat there silently, trying to regain our energy and calm down after what had happened, hoping they didn't see where we ran to. I looked out the window several times over the course of 10 minutes, and thankfully, they never showed up again. We talked about it, and we were glad that we were both okay and nothing bad happened to us. We were trying to figure out what they wanted with us. Did they want to kill us, rob us, have sex with us? God only knows. My friend hung around for another half hour before he insisted on heading home. He left, and then I went to bed. I kept thinking about what had happened and pondered on what would have happened if they caught me. Even as I'm typing this, I still have those thoughts. I eventually fell asleep, and I woke up and told my parents what happened. They were thankful that my friend and I were okay, but were upset for us that we chose to walk home and should have accepted the lift from my other friend, or even called them, and they would have picked us up. Regardless, we filed a police report, and I gave them all the information I could. Unfortunately, we never heard anything about it again, and I wonder sometimes what the hell they've been doing ever since. I really hope they never harmed another person after that. I can't express how thankful I am that we managed to get away from those freaks, and to this day, this incident is still the scariest thing that has ever happened to me in my life. This incident definitely made me more wary of my surroundings, and I try to do my best to avoid situations where I need to walk late at night, whether I'm by myself or not. I don't know what would have happened had those people had gotten their hands on me, but I do know one thing: I never want to meet those people ever again. I bought my first house 9 months ago. It's a huge accomplishment for me. On the evening after I closed on the house, I had a little champagne toast in the new place. I invited my boyfriend, my sister, we'll call her Jay, her 4-year-old daughter, we'll call her M, my best friend, Aunt T, and my son and brother who live with me. It only lasted an hour or two. I gave everyone the tour. My best friend and Jay wanted to stop in every room and talk about my plans for it. I ordered pizza. We had a champagne toast. My niece M had a great time running through the house. She and my sister have a 700 square foot apartment, so my place seemed huge to her. M loved my room. I have a closet in my room with a built-in pedestal kind of thing, so we sat her on it and joked that it could be her room. All in all, it was a good time. Everyone who didn't live there headed out around the same time, starting with Jay and M. It was a school night. Not even 5 minutes after Jay and M left, my sister calls me, still driving home. My sister sounded shaken, and I was worried for a second that her car broke down, or she got in an accident. But no. Jay says she asked M if she had a good time, and if she liked Aunt D's new place. M says, yeah, I had fun with Aunt D, Aunt T, and that little girl. My sister said she actually pumped the brakes on the car because her instinct was to stop the car in its tracks. There were no other children in the house that night, just M. Jay is trying not to scare M, but she wants to know more, so she gently asks, oh, what little girl? M says, the one that was standing behind Aunt D all night. My sister presses her a little more and asks M what the little girl looks like. M says she has long black hair and she has on a pretty blue dress. My sister asks if the little girl spoke to her. M says no, she was shy, but she had fun chasing each other through the house, and the little girl was sitting in her house, aka my closet, when we opened the door. M hesitated to walk into the closet at first, and I didn't know why. Now, I know why. Apparently, I have a little ghost girl in my house. She likes my closet, and me. My house was built in 1900, so it has a long history, but I haven't looked into the history yet. I have not seen or heard a thing in this house since I moved in, but I did not sleep well the first few nights. I've worked as a correctional officer for a long time. I've worked at facilities in Texas and Michigan. The oldest prison I've ever worked at just recently started to close in Michigan, and it got me thinking about all the paranormal experiences I had there and in other prisons I've worked at. I'd like to share with all of you some of the more notable paranormal experiences that I've had while working in these prisons. First of all, I'd like to say that I've never really believed in ghosts before I started working as a correctional officer. I started off working in Texas at an intake facility. I worked night shifts 12 hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first experience that I ever had was working on a lower security housing unit. When finishing a round, I was chatting with my partner and I heard a loud banging sound. It was at like 3 a.m. at this point. No prisoner should be out of their bunks. I asked my partner if they knew what the banging was. They, being an older officer, told me bluntly that the unit we were working was haunted. They told me the sound was coming from a door of one of the small, quiet cells in a hallway, not directly visible from the officer's station, and about how a prisoner had died in one. The prisoner allegedly died because the officers working there at the time had given them a sack of food when it was lunchtime for prisoners, and the prisoner had choked on the food and died. I really didn't believe that the unit was haunted, so I decided to go look at this door. The sound volume increased as I got closer to the door. The door itself was visibly shaking as if someone was pounding on it. There was nothing that could have been causing the door to shake like it was. I was at a loss for words. Later that night, I checked the door again, and there was a steamed up handprint visible on the glass of the door's window. Another experience I had was at the same facility, but at a different housing unit. It was around 1 to 2 a.m., and I was sitting inside the officer station, watching the cameras and talking to my partner. I looked at one of the cameras and clearly see a prisoner sitting at a table in the day room. I turned my head to look at the day room, and no one is sitting at the table I just saw on camera. I asked my partner to go check it out because no one is supposed to be out of bed yet. I roll back the time on the camera to see if I could see where the prisoner might have gone. The prisoner on the camera literally slowly fades away and vanishes completely. My partner comes back into the officer station, and we both watch this video over and over. Later on that same night, during one of my rounds, I notice a wet floor sign that got left out. I return it to the porter closet. I get back to the officer station, and I look back to where the porter closet is, and I see the same wet floor sign left out. I ask my partner if they're playing a joke on me or something, because I just put the sign away. Partner denies doing anything with it. I go back out and make sure I put the sign back in the closet and lock the door. I get back to the officer station. Wet floor sign right there in the open again. My partner and I are both watching this wet floor sign now. It starts to tip over on one end, very slowly, 2 of its legs off the ground. The sign then slams itself to the ground. It then proceeded to slide quickly up the hallway and then back to in front of the closet door before ceasing all movement. My partner and I refused to come out of the officer station for the rest of the night because we were scared shitless. One more notable one from Texas. I was working in an ADSEG unit, really high security unit for prisoners that get in fights and cause a lot of problems repeatedly. We had a prisoner who was sitting in one of our close observation cells. These cells are usually used for people who threaten harming themselves. In the summertime, prisoners will sometimes say that they are suicidal to be put in one of these cells because they are a lot cooler and are near AC vents that the normal housing units don't have. The prisoner told me that this was what they were doing and that they didn't want to cause any problems. Later on that night, one of my partners and I were watching cameras, and all of a sudden, we see a shadow moving across the floor. Eventually, it comes to the closed observation cell and disappears under the door. This is where it gets a little crazy. I do a round and check on the closed observation cell. The prisoner is pacing in the cell. I ask the prisoner if they're okay, and the prisoner tells me that something doesn't feel right and they're hearing voices that aren't there. I try to calm them down, and eventually they do and lay on the bed. Later on, my partner calls for assistance because the prisoner had bitten the skin of their own wrists, causing them to bleed, held them up above their head, and allegedly was speaking in tongues. When I started working at prisons in Michigan, I worked at a prison that is now closing. It was built back in 1877 and is one of the oldest prisons still operating in all of the United States. There were so many small experiences that I've had there. Doors would slam, you'd hear voices, cold chills. The first really notable experience I had was around Christmas time on third shift. I was working the oldest unit on the facility. Usually we don't have prisoners there, but we had opened the unit to separate prisoners during the COVID pandemic. I didn't have a partner due to how short-staffed we were, so one of the other officers set up a TV for me to keep me entertained, because I'd be really far away from all the other units and get bored with no one to talk to. I do rounds for most of the night, watching TV in between them. I suddenly hear a banging noise from a door that leads to a hallway that takes you all the way to an even older, unused, condemned part of the prison. I open the door and take a look down the hallway. A cold breeze hits me, and suddenly my arm hairs stand on end. I close the door, thoroughly creeped out. I go and sit down and start watching TV again. The TV starts flipping through channels rapidly and then stops on static. I have to get moved to a different unit because I'm scared shitless. One day, on third shift, my work friend and I were working positions that allowed us to have a lot of free time and no prisoners to watch. We decided to explore the prison. We explored the tunnels that went underneath the prison, the old barns, the old unstaffed gun towers. We eventually decided to go look at the old condemned part of the prison from my earlier experience. There was a big metal gate that was about halfway down the hallway that had to be operated by a big skeleton key. We get back to the old condemned part, and my friend tells me about how this part was supposed to be the old segregation. We had to use flashlights to see because this section is so old it's not powered. The energy back there I won't ever forget. Just being there filled me with a feeling of dread. I asked my friend to head back, and we started to head back to where the hallway to the gate was. My friend's flashlight suddenly dies. We make it to the hallway, barely able to see anything in the almost pitch blackness. We hear something running after us, so we started running up the hallway too. My friend fumbles with the key as we hear it getting closer. We get the gate open and sprint out of there. Later on, I noticed that my friend had red claw marks all over his arms. Well, that's all I got for you all. I hope you enjoy reading about these. This story happened in my hometown when I think I was about 8 or 9 years old. My hometown is very small, though there are multiple neighborhoods and the occasional abandoned house left to rot. At that time, I didn't know much of the town history, but I knew of the old building that was called the old, insert town name, school, by my classmates and teachers. Anyways, one day I was walking to school, and since the abandoned building is on my way, I took a glance at it. In one of the windows of the house, I saw a pure white curtain flapping around because of the wind. Behind the curtain, there were 3 elderly women that seemed to be having a conversation before looking down from the window at me, making eye contact. I still have a vivid memory of the look on one of the women's faces, a face of confusion. I quickly broke eye contact and continued walking to school. I don't remember what happened that day, except for that strange experience. I don't know what I saw that day, if it really happened, and if I was supposed to see it. For all I know, it could have been a dream. The only people I have told about this experience were my mom and friend. My mom said that I saw ghosts, like a past student of the school, but other than that, she laughed it off. My friend, on the other hand, was creeped out by the story, also telling me that I probably saw ghosts. For extra information, there is no reason for people to be entering the building, and there is no accessible entrance that I know of. The area around the building is all covered in weeds, vines, and bushes. All windows and doors are boarded up with wood, and no one investigates that building's area. I'm not sure if I really did see ghosts or if it was a dream. I might try to get a picture of the building when I can to support my story.